So again, thanks for joining me today. My name is Zach Gallinger, and I'm the president of Talent Hero Media. And today we're going to discuss a topic that I think is far too often ignored by recruiters, and that is the power of search engine marketing, and more specifically, Google. Since we only have about 45 minutes today, including our Q&A, I'm going to jump right into the material. Before I do, I want to point out that there is a chat box. So if you have any questions, please enter them there. And we will have at the Q&A session at the end, we will try and see how many we can cover. So with that, I'm just going to quickly reduce this just to make sure there's no issues with anybody not being able to hear me. Okay, doesn't look like anybody's had any complaints, so I'm going to go jump right back in. Okay, let's start with the agenda. So it's a brief agenda because we're going to discuss a lot of these topics in quite a bit of detail. So first, we're going to just briefly discuss who I am. Then we'll give an overview of what SEO is and how it can help you obtain the seat of power. And of course, we'll spend some time defining the term seat of power first. Next, we'll dig deep into an explanation of how Google's algorithm actually works to rank websites. I think this is pretty important because in order for you to really buy into the concept of SEO, you need to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes. Then we'll examine a hypothetical recruiter working in the retail space and see what type of search volume he could expect if he were optimized for Google. And more importantly, the level of new business that might bring in. And then finally, we'll have about a 15-minute Q&A at the end to answer some of the questions that I'm sure will come up as we go through this presentation. Who am I? So I have 10 years of experience in web design and online marketing, and specifically I have extensive experience in SEO in multiple competitive industries. So what does that mean? It means that I've helped businesses from restaurants to dentists to plumbers all improve their search engine rankings in Google, which in turn leads to new business. And of course, I've helped a number of recruiting industries as well. So I actually recently launched Talent Hero Media specifically to serve the recruiting industry. So that means that Talent Hero Media only helps with web design and online marketing for recruiters. And the reason I decided to start this business is because, to put it gently, I believe that recruiting is a bit behind the times in terms of online marketing. And so I've had a desire to kind of move the industry forward. And I think given the competitiveness of the industry, with obviously there being thousands of solo practitioners and really small shops, I think that recruiters who buy into this concept of online marketing will actually be at a huge competitive advantage. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth here, and it's something that I'm really interested in, helping out recruiters with. So let's get into the meat of the presentation. So I'm going to start just with a quick overview of what SEO is. So as you probably know, SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization, and it's the practice of optimizing your site for the purpose of improving your rankings in Google. What that means is using certain tactics both on your site and off your site so that people who enter keywords in Google that relate to your business will find your business versus your competition. So, and to explain the value of SEO, I mean, it's obviously somewhat obvious, but there is something I think a little bit deeper to think about. I'm going to start with the concept of the seat of power. And to do so, I'm going to start there with a question. So what do a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant have in common? And I think what's interesting is that there is a commonality here. So a doctor will ask you to pull down your pants when you come into his office. A lawyer will probably ask for your criminal record if you have one. And an accountant will ask how much money you have. And in all cases, you typically won't really bat an eye before complying, even though these are often very personal questions. And so one thing to think about is, why do we do that? Why do we comply so readily? And the reason is because we know that these people have experience and training. We give them credibility and trust. Or in other words, we assign them the seat of power. So in short, the seat of power is held by the person who controls an interaction. So let's think about how this relates to the traditional recruiting model so we can tie it all back. So, in the traditional recruiting model, the client puts out a request for proposal, or perhaps you contact them via cold call, and the client then gets to set the terms of the agreement you ultimately sign. That might mean that you're operating on a contingency basis when you would have preferred a retained search, or you might sign at a fee level that is lower than you might have hoped for. And the reason this often happens to recruiters is that they don't necessarily have the seat of power. You're simply working for the client to fill the needs that he already knows he has. But of course, there is an alternative model, and I know that as you, many of you are Pinnacle recruiters who are quite successful, you're probably familiar with this model. In this alternative model, there's a partnership or a consultative approach that you use with your client. And in this model, you're working together with the client because he knows he can help you. He knows that he can trust you to help him with what he doesn't know, which is pretty similar to how you might feel when you go to a doctor's office. So in this case, you own the seat of power, and typically you're going to be able to sign a contract with far more favorable terms. So of course, if you think about the goal of, maximizing the amount of money you have and obviously maximizing, choosing the best clients, everything, that a recruiter wants to obtain, it seems relatively straightforward to understand that you want to obtain the seat of power. So this is a concept, the seat of power, that actually was something that Jeremy Sizemore from ASAP Talent Services, who's on this webinar, taught me about. And we discussed it from many different angles. There's obviously different ways to obtain the seat of power and maintain the seat of power. But obviously, I'm going to focus specifically on Google. So as we all know, people tend to trust Google search results, right? So when someone shows up ranked highly in Google, we believe, and sometimes this is often not correct, but we do believe that this business is a top tier provider of services in whatever industry we're looking for. And what you can do is use that belief to work in your advantage. So if you take advantage of SEO and your business shows up ranked highly in Google, you can use Google's authoritative voice to obtain a seat of power, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense. When a client contacts you after finding out about you from Google, rather than the typical situation where you may have contacted the client, you are immediately controlling the interaction because you know right from the start that they have an interest in you. You didn't actually go out and find them, they found you, because Google's really told them through their authoritative voice that you're the best, and therefore you should act like you're the best, and you can own the negotiations right from the start and maintain a seat of power. So one question you might have, well, what does this look like in practice? And again, I'm going to go back to Jeremy's business, ASAP Talent Services, because he's an example of somebody who really has bought into this concept and succeeded, with SEO. So imagine that you're looking for an SAP recruiter. And so you start by putting in various search terms into Google. And what you quickly find is that ASAP Talent Services absolutely dominates search results for these types of queries. So for SAP recruiters, Jeremy's business is ranked number 7. For SAP retained search, number 4. Executive search, number 2. And for SAP executive recruiter, number 1. And so obviously, somebody who finds ASAP Talent Services through this method is going to have a much higher level of trust initially than they would if, for example, ASAP Talent Services were to reach out to them. And there's actually a nice secondary benefit that is often not considered by ranking highly in Google, which is that imagine if you get a traditional word of mouth referral, and what you find is that those businesses, those potential clients, they're often going to do their own research and perform some of these searches. So imagine that ASAP Talent Services gets a word of mouth referral from, say, a past client, and then that client also looks for SAP recruiters, and they're finding that, hey, ASAP Talent Services is ranking really highly as well. So right in this point, you actually have sort of a double referral. You have the traditional referral, but you also have the Google referral. So you can see, again, very powerful to rank highly in Google. So with that being said, we've just sort of covered the concept of SEO and the seat of power. I hope there should be some understanding on this level as to why SEO is important for your business. And now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the topic of Google and how it works. As I said, we're going to go a little bit deeper than you might typically see in a presentation on SEO, but I think it's important because SEO is complicated, but at the same time, it can be systematized and broken down. So this is going to try to show you that there are a lot of factors to consider, but if you do it comprehensively, there's no reason that you can't have success. So I'm going to talk about various factors that determine how your page ranks in Google. So let's talk about page speed. So page speed, how fast your site loads. On average, sites that load faster tend to rank higher. And in fact, sites that load very slowly tend to rank much lower than they would have otherwise, all things being equal. And sometimes pages that are quite low will actually be demoted in search rankings. Another factor to consider is content length. So you often hear people say, you should write short blog posts, people have short attention spans. But if you actually look at the research, pages that have longer content tend to rank higher in Google, and that's for a number of reasons. One is that oftentimes you just need a lot of words to explain a concept. If you're going to really offer value to people who come to your website by explaining a concept in the proper level of depth, sometimes you may need 2,000 words to explain it. There's also another really interesting point here, though, is that Google's matching a user's query, so whatever they type in for their search, against the text that's on your page. And the more text you have on the page, the more opportunities they have to actually match. So if you think about it, if you have 2,000 words versus 500 words, you actually have 4 times more keywords in that text. So longer content, on average, tends to perform better. Another factor, titles and descriptions. So not everyone knows this, but every single page that's built using HTML, which is the language of every website on the internet, has a page title and a meta description. So both of these are indicators to Google about what your page is actually about. But if you actually go look at pages on the internet, you'll often see pages that have sites that have left this content blank or have duplicates, so 2 pages with the same title or same description. Or sometimes they'll just have titles and descriptions that aren't really that helpful to Google. So Google uses this information to help determine what your page is about. And if you actually set this up properly, you'll tend to rank much more highly than sites that don't do it properly. Next factor is domain age. So again, all things being equal, older sites tend to rank better. And the reason is that Google doesn't always trust that a new site is going to stay on the internet, so they don't necessarily want to include it in their search rankings. So if you have a business that's older and you have an older domain, well, you have a natural advantage over a lot of your competition. Another factor is keyword usage. So what I've found from doing this for a while is that often clients will not necessarily know what types of searches people use when they're looking when their clients are looking for their business. So they've put certain keywords on their page hoping to match, but what clients are actually using when they search is very different. So thinking about the proper keywords to use on your site is pretty important, and there are a lot of research tools you can use to help you out with this topic. Next, mobile responsiveness. So depending on the industry, about 40 to 70% of all searches are done using mobile device, so a smartphone or a tablet. And you'll still find a lot of sites that don't really work well on mobile, and that's quite unfortunate because those companies tend to be penalized in the rankings. So Google actually maintains 2 separate search rankings. They have their desktop rankings and they have their mobile rankings. And sites that don't perform well on mobile tend to rank much lower, or in some cases, not at all. The last topic we're going to quickly touch on is URL structure. So this is, again, something quite technical, but still understandable. Every page that you go to has a URL, right? And thinking about how to structure those URLs to make sure that Google understands what the page is about is important. So for example, if you have a bunch of services that you offer on your site, then you may want to include the word services in the URL before you include the name of the service so that Google can understand what it's about. Again, this is a pretty complex topic when you actually dig deep into it, but that's kind of a high-level overview. So we've just talked about, some of the many factors that Google used, but we actually haven't touched on the 2 biggest ones. And the reason I've left them for the end is because they're actually a little bit more complicated. Again, I'm not going to go into every little detail about these, but I do want to give you some understanding of what you should be thinking about when you're thinking about these 2 topics. The first one is links. So we all know what a link is, right? Every time we navigate between a website, we click on a link and we go to another page, right? But that's kind of not quite how we should think about it when we're talking about Google. So the way Google works, obviously, is that the more links that point to your site, so the more times somebody else links to you, the higher authority you have. Because when a site links to you, Google kind of treats it as a recommendation. So if site A recruits to your recruiting site, then think about it. They're basically saying, site A is basically saying, hey, check out this business. I'm vouching for it in some way. So anytime you obtain a new link, you will probably get some benefit from it in terms of improving your search ranking. Of course, though, not all links are created equally. And that's something that can be a little bit, it's quite a complex topic on how that works, but we'll cover a few of the basics. So high authority versus low authority links. So depending on the site that links to you, you may get a lot of value from a link. You may get a little bit of value from a link. So for example, if Forbes.com links to you, that could be huge for your business. That may actually have a significant impact on where you're ranking for certain search terms. If a small blog links to you, it may not matter because Google doesn't really know if that blog has any value, so they're not really sure if they should treat that link as having any significant meaning. Another factor, relevant versus non-relevant. So relevancy of the linking site is a pretty important factor. So for example, the Undercover Recruiter, it's a popular recruiting blog. If they link to your recruiting business's site, you may get a significant bump in your search rankings because it's essentially an endorsement from a relevant blog. Let's say, for example, a local news site covers your business for whatever reason, that link may be a lot less valuable because it's not really relevant. It doesn't really tell Google anything about your particular business. Again, don't want to say any of these lesser links are not important. You can actually gain quite a bit of authority from collecting a bunch of lesser links. But if you had to choose between the two, you'd always pick either the higher authority one or the more relevant one. And again, last topic I'm going to briefly touch on is anchor text. So what is anchor text? Well, anchor text is the actual text that is linked. So if you think about it, anytime you click a link, you're clicking, underlined blue text for the most part, right? And that whatever text is underlined that's called the anchor text. And Google is treating that anchor text as a sign as to what this link is really about. So for example, imagine I'm I'm having my business profiles, right? So it says Talent Hero Media is a recruitment web design company. There could be two opportunities for me to get a link. The person who creates that link may choose to link the words Talent Hero Media to my business, or they may choose to link the words recruitment web design to my business. In most cases, that recruitment web design link is going to be much more valuable because it's telling Google, hey, this company does recruitment web design, versus the first one is more of a milder endorsement. So again, you can see that there's a lot of different factors to consider here, all totally understandable, but it is something that needs to be something you need to go through quite thoroughly in order to properly consider the topic of links. So we've covered links. Let's cover another very important factor about Google, which is called interaction. So there are a number of interaction factors. We're just going to cover three right now, and these are the ones that are probably the most important. The first one is called click-through rate. Before we go into that, I'm going to define that term for you. So this is a sample search for the term IT recruiter. So this is what you'd get if you searched on google.com without any regional settings. So you may not see this exactly if you do it yourself, but this is a pretty good representative example. So what is the click-through rate? Well, the click-through rate is the percentage of the time that your link is clicked. So let me give you a more concrete example. Imagine that I'm lucasgroup.com. So that's my business. As you can see, I'm ranked number 4th for the term IT recruiter. And we know that businesses that are in the 4th spot on a Google search result tend to be clicked about 8% of the time. So obviously, the higher you tend to rank for a search term, the more likely it is you're going to be clicked, which I'm sure is pretty much in line with how you all use Google. So let's say I'm Lucas Search Group and I rank in 4th position. So I'm expected to be clicked on 8% of the time by Google. But for whatever reason, maybe because I have a great title tag, which in this case is IT jobs, information technology careers, IT management jobs, or a great description, which is the longer text underneath, I get clicked, say, 12% of the time. That's basically sending a signal to Google that maybe they should rank me a little bit higher. So what you'd find if that were the case is that maybe you check back in a month and you'd actually see that lucasgroup.com is ranked number 3, and maybe the one above it, Robert Half, is pushed down one. So that's how click-through rates impact how Google ranks your business. And you can sort of change that by having great title tags and great descriptions. So there is something you can do to control this and make your link more appealing than everything else that shows up on the page. Next topic, bounce rate. So what's a bounce rate? The bounce rate is the percentage of people who click through to your site, look at only one page, and then go back to Google. So what you want to do is minimize your bounce rate. Every time someone bounces from your page, or in other words, looks at one page and then leaves right away, that's a sign to Google that your site as a whole doesn't offer as much value as a site with a lower bounce rate. So what you want to do is obviously change your page to make it what's called more sticky, right? And that it means somehow encouraging people to click on other things once they come to your site rather than just read the single page that they're on and leave. So it's a complicated topic of how you do that, but there's definitely tactics you can employ. The last factor, time on site. So what is time on site? Time on site is a metric that is basically pretty straightforward. How long does someone spend on your site when they get there? And again, topic of stickiness comes up because the more time people spend on your site, the more of a signal is being sent to Google that people like your site. So all things being equal, if people spend longer on your site, you'll tend to have higher search results. So as you can see, there's a lot of different factors. I haven't by any means covered all the factors that Google uses to rank, and even the ones I have covered, haven't gone into all the details. But I hope now you have some sense of the fact that Google is complex but understandable, and it can be cracked with the proper attention paid to it. So now that we've covered the topic of how Google works, I'm going to do a brief demo for you to put yourself in the shoes of a hypothetical recruiter and show you what type of new business you might expect if you have an optimized site. So let's go in to start by going into AdWords. So AdWords, as some of you may know, is the tool that's used to run ads at the top of every Google search result. What the nice benefit is, if you have an active AdWords account, you can also use it to find out how many people actually are searching for keywords related to your business. So we're going to do that now. We're going to click the Search for New Keywords tab, and we're going to imagine ourselves as a retail recruiter operating in the executive search space. And so I'm just going to put in the term executive search retail. So I'm not going to this would be somebody who didn't maybe put a ton of thought into this. And you can see why you don't necessarily have to do that. And then you click Get Ideas. What we immediately see is that there are 522 ideas for search terms related to this business. And if we look at it, we see there's 1 million searches per month, which of course seems way too high. I definitely know that there are not 1 million people per month searching on this relatively niche topic. And the reason is that Google is not great always at understanding what you want to do. So you have to do some cleanup if you're going to do this yourself. And I'm going to walk you through that process. So let's click Download Ideas. I'm not going to actually download it because I've already done it, but this would basically just download an Excel version of this table. So we have that done. We've downloaded that file, and here it is. Okay. So we have a list of all those 522 keywords. And what we can quickly see if we look through it is there's a lot of non-relevant terms. For example, CEO jobs, well, doesn't really relate to recruiting, to retail recruiting. We see terms like headhunter. 368,000 searches per month. That'd be great if you could rank for it, but you can imagine it's probably highly competitive. Also doesn't really have a strong buying intent. People searching for that are not necessarily looking for those services. Another really interesting thing to note quickly, and this is something that a lot of people tend to miss, is that it gives you the number of monthly searches for each term. What it says here is exact match only. What that means is this is the number of people who are typing exactly these words in. So if there's any modifier added to this, it doesn't get counted. So what this tends to mean is that these numbers actually underestimate the percentage of people who are searching for these keywords. So that's actually great news for somebody in this industry. So again, there's far too many keywords here. We are not going to try and rank for all of them, but what we want to do is quickly filter that out. So I've added a formula here that basically says if this keyword has the word retail in it or not. So if it does, it says true. If it says it does not, it says false. So I'm going to quickly run a filter here, and I see all of the search terms that have the word retail in them. I'm going to now quickly look through this list and see if there's anything that's not appropriate still remaining. And quickly I find there's one, Retail Recruiters NYC. I may want to try and rank for that at a different time, but now I'm just thinking at a national level, so I'm going to delete that. Again, I see Retail Headhunters NYC. I'm thinking at the national level, so I'm going to delete that. And then finally, I see the Retail Recruiter, which sounds like a name of a business. I'm not necessarily going to go after that, so I'm going to delete it. And now I'm left with a bunch of retail-related recruiting terms. So I'm going to copy that list, and I'm going to go back to the keyword planner. And this time I'm going to open this second tab, which is Get Search Volume Data and Trends. I'm going to paste in the link, and I'm going to click Get Search Volume. And quickly, now I have a much more reasonable assessment of how many searches I might expect per month, 4,860 last April, which seems like a pretty reasonable number. And I can, of course, see the average number of searches for every single term. So what do I do with this information? Well, I want to try and figure out how many new clients I may be able to get if I were to actually use SEO for my site. And so we've come up with a simple formula to create a rough estimation of that. So let's start by putting in the number of searches per month that we just found, 4,860. The next cell has the average ranking. So this is basically, on average, how high do we think we can expect to rank for the search terms? And we obviously don't know this in advance. We're probably, if we're just starting this exercise, we're probably ranking very low. So we're probably, maybe ranking 50th or 60th, and we're getting absolutely no search volume. But let's say, with a lot of work and hard effort on our SEO, we can rank number 6. And so if we look at this table on the right, we see that businesses who rank in the 6th position tend to get about 5% of the clicks for a search. And that data comes straight from Google. So let's do a basic calculation. We take 4,860 searches per month, and we get 5% of those clicks. So we're going to get 243 searches per month, visitors per month to our site. Next, we have another very tricky variable, which is the conversion rate. So basically, of these 243 visitors, how many can we actually turn into new business for us? And again, if you're just starting out and you don't really have a lot of organic search traffic, you're not really going to have a number for this. So right now, we're just going to use a pessimistic assessment and assume that we can get, let's say, 0.5% of these visitors to be a new client. That's about 1 in 200, which I think is roughly reasonable. And what that means is that if we can find 243 times 0.56, we can get about 1.2 clients per month by dominating retail recruiting and being in the 6th position. And that would mean about 14 new clients per year. And as anybody, obviously, every recruiter knows, getting 14 new clients per year for most recruiters would be a pretty significant addition to their top line revenue. So you can see right away the power of Google's search engine marketing. I mean, if you could add 15 new clients per year, you'd probably be able to double your business at least. So now we can see the power of it. I hope this all sort of makes sense. I'm just going to run a quick, check to see if what would happen, for example, if you were operating in a smaller market. Let's say at 2,000 searches per month. In this case, you'd still get 6 new clients per year. So you can really see that for every single recruiting related niche, if you spend the time to optimize your site, there should be a significant benefit to your business. And that concludes the demo portion. Before we get into the Q&A, I just want to, first of all, thank you for all coming today. And also let you know that this would be the first in a 3-part series. Our next series, our next webinar in this series is on basic SEO. So in that, we're going to cover what's called on-page SEO. So what are the changes you can make on your site to help Google rank you higher? And then the third session, which will be called advanced SEO, we're going to just talk about some of the more complex topics around SEO, such as how to obtain links for your site and how to increase the stickiness of your site so that you can minimize your bounce rate, and maximize your time on site, which are some topics that we discussed previously. So if anybody has any questions, please enter them into the chat box. I'm also going to unmute the microphone, so if anybody wants to speak up there, you have the opportunity to sort of just use your microphone and ask a question.
I have a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So what is a good bounce rate? Do we know what that would look like? I mean, versus a bad bounce rate, or?
Yes, that's a good question. It's very industry dependent, and it's very source dependent as well. So traffic that comes from Google, for example, will tend to have higher bounce rates than traffic that comes from other sources, because people tend to maybe looking just for a specific, like a very narrowly focused topic, and they may, for example, end up at a blog post on your site rather than maybe looking for your services. So it's very hard to know, but I would say if you can get your bounce rate under 60%, you're doing a very good job. There's no way, like it's very much dependent on the industry, but you're never going to get it, getting it below 30, probably impossible, for example. Just there's a lot of people who are searching, they want one piece of information and then they're going to leave. And that's not necessarily a reflection of your site's not doing a good job. So yeah, I would aim for 60, and then but also be making sure if you're using, for example, Google Analytics, which is another topic in and of itself on online marketing, you should be looking at not necessarily just your site-wide bounce rate, but also the bounce rate for the different sources of traffic that you have. So there's obviously many other sources besides Google.
Any coffee left or no?
Like a mate.
Yeah, I'll take some.
And you said you had a second question?
Yeah, if it doesn't come out, I'm throwing it out garbage.
Hey, Zach, this is Diana Gazzolo. How you doing? Thanks for sharing all this. I have a quick question for you. I'm going through the process of doing a new website when I get a new applicant tracking system. Is this your consulting gig? Can I just hire you to do this crap rather
than... Exactly. Yes, we do this. This is our full-time job.
Perfect. Great. Okay, because really my brain is, I get some of the basics of it. I understand, but I'm really not interested in playing with this stuff.
Absolutely. There's definitely two different markets for this. There's people who want to spend, there's people who want to spend the time learning this, and there's people who want to pay someone, and
totally make more money as a headhunter than this crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, great. Okay, well, look, you have our information. If you can just send me or send something to Pinnacle where we can have your contact info, that'd be perfect.
Yeah. I think Jeremy's going to send something out. So,
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. It actually kept my attention for about 20 minutes, which is pretty
good. Yeah, I know. It's a bit of a dry topic. I tried to make it as interesting as it possibly can be.
Yeah, well, Pinnacle people, I mean, we have minds like a sieve. I mean, it's awful. I mean, keeping our attention, you're lucky to keep us in a room for 10 minutes, let alone listen.
Fair enough.
But thank you for your time. Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you very much for listening. Jeremy has a couple of questions. Do I recommend AdWords, pay-per-click, or push marketing? Yeah, they can be effective, but you really need to know what you're doing. So for example, AdWords is, if you set up an AdWords account and just sort of follow Google's basic instructions, which anyone can do, I can guarantee you'll be wasting thousands of dollars within a few weeks. So you really need to think, it's an entire topic in and of itself. But there's a lot of considerations like, is this whatever you're trying to market, for example, something that you can figure out what keywords are have a high buying intent. And then can you build landing pages to capture people's contact information very quickly? And how competitive is it? Some spaces, I'm sure in recruiting especially, probably have very high cost per click. So again, it's kind of something you have to look at on a case-by-case basis, but I am sure there's probably opportunities. If you look at the typical term, that people might use to find a specific type of recruiter, you will see lots of ads, and that's usually it's a bad sign that there's competition. It's a good sign because it means that somebody's kind of figured it out. So you do have the opportunity to do so as well. Other types of pay-per-click advertising, Facebook and LinkedIn, even Twitter. Certainly there's definitely opportunities there. They have different ways of targeting people. So you may be able to target based on demographics in some of those cases and find, for example, hiring managers or senior level executives in certain types of companies that you want to get in front of. So that you may not have kind of the same response rate as like an AdWords ad where you know exactly what somebody has clicked on. But you may find that you may be able to sort of do things like build brand awareness. And in terms of push marketing, I'm not really sure can you elaborate on that term? And then the other thing, Jeremy, you asked about having video on your landing page. I don't think that's, I think it's going to have a very minor impact on your SEO. I think if you have a video that has a proper title and a proper description, you shouldn't really have any issues as long as it doesn't slow down the page too much from loading. Using YouTube for SEO, that's a very complicated topic. And if you use YouTube for SEO, I would actually point you to a site called backlinko.com, BACKLINKO.com. The person who writes that site is quite good at this SEO, at covering the topic of SEO. And he's put together a really interesting guide on how to use YouTube for SEO. I might as well simply just see if I can find that very quickly because I believe it's one of his more recent posts. Here it is. I'm going to post that into the chat. If you want to have a look at that, it's something that I'm not done a ton of work in, and it's very complicated to actually get your head around it. But it is something that can drive traffic to your business. If you can get videos ranking for your recruiting business in search results, you probably have so little competition when it comes to recruiters doing this well that you may have a huge competitive advantage there. Any other questions before we go?
I haven't. So you talked about stickiness to your website. It's Andy Miller again. And so I'm sure it varies, but so what's a decent stickiness and how long they stay on versus a bad one?
Well, okay. So a couple things to consider here. If you're looking in Google Analytics, there is a time on site metric there. But what people don't realize often is it can be highly misleading because Google doesn't know how long someone spent on your site until they actually click a second page. So for example, if I go to a site and I spend 10 minutes on the site, or if I spend 1 minute on the site and then I leave, then my time on site is measured as 0 because Google doesn't actually know how long I was there because they can only tell when someone clicks on a page. So that's one thing you should be very careful about using time on site. There are ways you can adjust it. There's some articles you can find, you should be able to find by Googling. Again, time on site, like I don't want to sound like I'm dodging the question. It's just that it really depends on how people find you. So like if you actually, this is what I would recommend to people if they're familiar with Google Analytics, is actually look at the different time on site and bounce rates, not just by type of traffic source, but also by page type. So for example, if you have a long blog post and you see that the time on site is like really short, or maybe the bounce rate's really high, that might mean that like for whatever reason, it's not really encouraging people to click anywhere else. And you might have the intuition that it should, so you may want to think about what changes you can make. If your time on site, if your bounce rate from your home page is high, for example, that could be a really bad sign because people are not actually clicking. Sorry, is someone talking? Having trouble. Just gonna mute everybody a second. So I just muted everybody, so I will unmute in a second. So yeah, if your bounce rate for your homepage is very high, that could be probably a pretty bad sign because someone comes to your homepage, they're not even interested in learning like a single thing more than what's presented there. So again, that's like an example of a not sticky site, and you can think about what changes you can make to encourage people to click elsewhere. It's so specific, obviously, those changes to the page that the person's on, and how they found your site, that you really have to do a pretty in-depth analysis. But there are lots of examples. I'll give you one quick one. So let's say for blog posts, if you've written a blog post about related topics, you may want to have those either linked in the text of the blog, or maybe at the bottom, like sort of a section that says you may also like, because that encourages people to stay on your site. So that would be a good example of one way to increase stickiness. Video, again, is a good way to increase stickiness because, videos take a little bit longer to watch. So if somebody's actually watching that and going to different pages on your site, they're going to spend a lot more time on your site than if they than otherwise. Gonna unmute everybody. Okay, so it is 1:15 Eastern. So I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for coming and watching this webinar. I hope you found it
good. Anybody want to listen to whatever else he's saying right now? No? Okay.
And so
any feedback?
So thanks everybody for coming out again. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My address is here. I believe Jeremy is going to send out an email as well. If you have any, I told you about the next topics we're going to discuss, where we're going to delve a bit deeper into SEO. If you have any other topics you think are of interest to you, please let me know, and we can discuss either webinars or blog posts. My site, which is obviously talentheromedia.com, has a number of blog posts on this topic and related topics. So it's really just focused on online marketing. So if you want to have a look there, you can also check out some of the other topics available. And with that, I just want to say everyone have a great day, and I hope to see you again next month on our next webinar.